Hey, Michael with XForcePC. We're taking a look here at our new Super system, the XForce Super. You've probably heard that word thrown around with graphics cards before. So what we have here is very similar to our extremely popular RTX Pro system. Very, very similar, almost identical, just a couple of changes. The case has been changed for better ventilation or cooling. I also think it looks nicer. The power supply is a 750 instead of an 850, which is plenty. And we're including standard the 2080 Super, since we're calling it the Super system, instead of just the 2080. So those are the changes over the RTX Pro if you've been looking at that. So that does make it cost a couple $100 more, but you're getting that faster graphics card, so it's kind of a wash on the price. Now, here in the front is where visually the changes have taken place. Notice we have the lighting here down each side. This is where the air goes in. It goes in either side, can come in the bottom and the top here. And this lighting can be changed. There are two buttons here on the top. You can change the pattern, the color, and so forth. This is just sort of doing a rainbow pulsing type thing, but there's a lot of different things you can do, and it's easy. You don't have to run any software to do it. You just use the two buttons here on the top. Now behind this front, as I mentioned, there's better ventilation, so let's take a look at that. Front just pops off quite easily. Notice the lighting is integrated into the front. That gets transferred to it through these little pins. I don't know if you can see those right there, but there's little pins right there, and those pins make contact here when you put the front on. Now behind the front you have a large filter. This is the main reason I wanted to change to this case. Before, the filter media was about a third the size of this, so it would get dirty very quickly. I want larger filter media. So every 6 months or so you're going to want to come in here and you're going to want to clean this out, and it's held on with magnets. I'll show you that in a second. Behind this you see we have our water cooler for our processor. Air's going in, and then the radiator is behind these two fans, and so the air goes through the radiator and it can go out the back or out the top of the case. The filter hooks in right down here and then is held in at the top with magnets. So all the air coming in the sides and the top and the bottom of this front has to pass through this filter before it can go into the case. So it is important that you clean that every now and again. You just kind of use the heel of your hand and pop the front back on there, and that's all you got to do to get that on there. And again, just do that every 6 months or so. Next, let's take a look around at the side. Now, one thing I feel like I need to mention is always look at the printed word on our website for the specifications. For instance, there's 4 different models of the i9-9900, and we might switch between those due to pricing or availability. So always check the printed word for the specs. If I make one minor spec change, I'm not going to want to reshoot this whole video. So again, just review the words on the page for your specs, just to be sure something hasn't changed, a minor change. Now, on the side here, as most premium cases have nowadays, we have a tempered glass side panel. This is much better than plexiglass because it, for the most part, won't scratch. Plexiglass, scratches very easily. And it's extremely clear. Now, it is sort of tinted, but it never gets really a haze on it like plexiglass can as well. Now in here, you may or may not be able to see, we have the radiator up here in the front and the little hoses running down and going to the pump, which is right above the processor. That's the way almost all water coolers are designed these days. There's a whole patent thing with that, where the pump is right over the top of the processor, and then you also see that there's some color there. That is customizable in the water cooler software. You can also customize the speed of the fan and the speed of the pump. We will set up a good profile for that. So my recommendation is leave our profile and use it. but you can have multiple, fan profiles. You could have one for when you're gaming versus when you're, doing spreadsheets or whatever. But really, one profile should get the job done, because if you've been gaming, after things cool back down, all the fans slow back down. Same holds true with the case fans. Those are actually connected though to the motherboard, and those will vary their speed based on temperature. So the hotter it gets inside the case, the faster the fans will spin, and then they will slow down, as opposed to lower end systems where the fans just run full blast all the time. Bad thing about that is you're drawing tons of dust and debris into your system when you overventilate your case. You can overventilate. You only ventilate a case as much as necessary because you're drawing dust in. Even if you're passing it through a filter, some of it's going to get through. Now in here, we're equipping this with the 2080 Super graphics card, because we're calling this the Super system, and we might as well use the Super card. We are using 2 sticks of DDR4 3600 memory. We have a 2 terabyte M.2 NVMe SSD. That's a lot of numbers and letters there. What that means is the SSD is fast. This particular one is about 1,800 to 2,000 megabytes per second, which is really, really fast. SATA, the old SATA standard, which a lot of systems still use, is hard limited to about 500 megabytes per second. So this is about 4 times that fast. Now you can get faster drives than the one we put in here, but what we found is you can measure that speed in a synthetic benchmark, but to the naked eye, day-to-day usage, a faster SSD than the one we have in here doesn't really make any difference. You would never notice the difference. There's always a point of diminishing returns with when you're updating one particular component in a system. We have a Z390 motherboard, which is the enthusiast class of motherboard, the high-end enthusiast, whatever you want to call it, supporting the latest processors on the enthusiast platform. In this particular system, the i9-9900KF. Again, as I mentioned earlier, check your printed specs just to make sure we haven't changed that at some point. We also have a 700 watt power supply, which is more than enough. Total system draw on this, if you manage to max out the GPU and the CPU at the same time, would be somewhere around 400 watts. And power supplies actually run the most efficient at about a 50% load, because the efficiency curve on a power supply is just that, it's a curve. And of course, in the middle of that curve is when it's most efficient. So if you're running this thing at 50% load, it's going to be nice and efficient. I think that pretty much covers the side. Let's go ahead and take a look at the top. All right, I'm doing a bit of a balancing act here, but what we have is a power button, and we have a headphone microphone jack, and we have 2 USB 3s. We have those 2 buttons I mentioned earlier that allows you to change the color and the pattern of the lighting by simply pressing these different buttons. And then in the top, we can support 2 fans, and depending on what you option it with, you may have 1 fan up there, you may have 2 fans up there. As you heard me mention earlier, you don't want to over-ventilate a case. So we'll put the proper amount of ventilation in. And if you go with the 2080 Ti, we'll have 2 fans up here for sure. And if you go with the regular 2080 Super, we may just have 1 fan up there. And then also it supports 120 and 140 millimeter fans. So depending again on what you option this thing with, the size of the fan may vary slightly as well. Now let's take a look around back. Okay, I pulled the power on this. There's not a lot as far as lights go back here, but this has built-in wireless AC, so we have some antenna connections here. Of course, it comes with 8-channel audio. We have a 120 millimeter fan. I know it says made in China, but that's just the case was made in China. Obviously, I made the computer. I built the computer. But as you probably know, all the components are made in the Far East. Down here we have the power supply, which draws its power from underneath and then blows it out the back, so it's sort of an isolated stream of air. And then we also have down here, just for the power supply, a little filter. It just slides out, a little piece of fuzz there, and then slides back in. So you'll want to clean that out every 6 months or so. If your computer's sitting on the floor, that's going to get dirty a lot quicker than if it's sitting up on a table. And that's true for really all of the whole computer. It gets it draws in a lot more dust the lower it is in the room. We have, of course, our graphics card, and all the graphics cards come with, typically, I say all, typically they come with 1, 2, 3 display ports and 1 HDMI, and then the high-end cards like this one also come with a Type-C connector, which we have yet to see utilized heavily for graphics, but that could come down the road. A lot of the high-end VR headsets supposedly are going to adopt this because this can carry the power and the signal on the same cable, but again, that hasn't really come to fruition yet. We've got multiple USB ports, 3.0, 3.1, and 2.0 on the back as well. And then the other side, we're not even going to look at that because that's just kind of a plain black side. So there you go. There's an overview of the new XForce Super System.